Well, why don't we get started? And I thank you everybody for coming on in today. Literally is about 40 of us in on this call, so that's exciting. This is our chance. We want to at least start with these webinars to give you an overview of where things are and what we've been doing, where we're going, answer some of the questions you have, show you a few things. And then as we get more and can get out more into the counties and things like that, we'll know, faces and names, and we can get to know you a little bit more. But at least here to start, we can give some faces and names and things like that. So we appreciate you coming, and hopefully we can get you some stuff that's hopefully usable for you. To start us off, though, I want to just get you a little bit to where you can see things. Let's see if I can share this. And just the information on your, if I can find the right F button, on your screen for handling controls and things like that. Okay, so you've got the screen controls, your microphone, you can mute yourself, unmute, or I can do it globally, but it's there. Your camera on and off if you want to show it. I don't think we'll need to share our screens too much today other than a few of us who are presenting, but this is a way that if we were in a bigger discussion or something, we can share screens back and forth. That's usually at the bottom, and then if you're so tired of the presentation, you can leave and say goodbye. Up in the upper right of your area is going to be a chat button, and that's where you can chat back to everybody, or if you had a specific person, you want to make sure you're choosing them because it does default to an everybody chat. So you can do that, and we're going to use it here shortly anyway and go from there as well. And then there's also viewing options at the very top of your screen. You can see everybody, and you can scroll up and down to see everybody. You can just see the active camera, so you could choose your own view of how you want to see people and things during this call. So you've got that as well. So there's a variety of options that you can do. So now, as you probably heard, again, I'm recording the webinar, so we can then post it onto a YouTube channel for IRIS information and things, and we'll build more of training tips and things. And as people call and suddenly there's a difficulty, I'll probably be recording those calls between us as well to just put things there, but we'll have this up on that YouTube site as well after we're done, and we can always refer back to that. So again, don't say anything about the haircut I need or anything like that when you're live on audio, so we don't want to have that. But really, to get us going, what I'd like to do is find out who we have on there on the call today, and go through, sort of let everybody say who they are and where they're from and all of those good things. So, but to start us off, I'd like to have Brian Worley, who is the Director of County Road Program, as well as IRIS, and he can kick us off and at least say who you are and what you'd like to do. So go ahead and jump on in, Brian.
Yeah, good to see everyone on the call today. So I'm Brian Worley. I'm the AOC Road Program Director. I recognize a good chunk of your names from Oasis, and good to see all the IRIS users as excited as we are that we're rolling out both IRIS 10 programming and getting you engaged on new programming and existing programming and our team here. So anyway, please, ask questions as we go through. This is just one of the first webinars that we plan on doing for the IRIS programming, and more to come where we'll dive into a number of other topics. So good to see you all on the phone today, and I'll hand it over to the rest of our IRIS team for them to introduce themselves.
Yeah, Casper, why don't you jump on and you go from there, Casper, and tell us who you are and what you've been doing or what you do, and we can go there.
I'm Casper Leonard. I'm the IT director. I make sure most of the IRIS systems keep running and then oversee most of the other IT projects within the Association of Oregon Counties. For the most part, the majority of my time is with the programming team and the development team for IRIS 10. Okay,
Ken Smith.
I'm Ken Smith. I'm the database administrator and developer. I also take care of the database and the database development. And I've also been working with GIS and trying to extend and clean up and do what we can with GIS.
Good deal. Thank you. Tom Emery.
Hi, my name is Tom. I am currently a developer for Iris. I do a lot of the UI and backend stuff that you will probably see in the next several webinars. So it's me.
And Ray Dennison.
Hello, I'm Ray. I'm an Iris developer. My main focus is on the reports, and Tom and I have been working on Iris for the past, what is it, Tom? 4.5 years now, almost 5 years. So, yep, that's me.
Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. Okay, so, today you've met the team, which is good. We want to talk a little bit about using IRIS9 offsite, some of the issues with security and printers and that. So if you haven't had a chance, if you haven't needed to, that's good. But again, as things start happening in the fall and more snow and other things, you may need to. So we want to make sure you know how to. We'll talk about what's been happening in Iris 10, a little bit about the upcoming webinars and any questions and that you might have, and see if we can get those answered for you. So that's where we are headed. And again, if you have specific questions as we're going through, the chat button in the upper right should be there. If you're looking at things, should give you an opportunity to chime in and go from there. So, and in fact, let me get rid of this. Let's go ahead and, so what I'd like to find out, is just curiosity, is go into the chat and are you using Iris at home, or are you back at the work completely, or are you a combination of both? Let's get an idea of what people are doing. So go ahead into the chat and just put in, are you home, office, or both? Send that away and we will see. Oh, back to work completely. Office, office, office. A little good. Home, we've got some doing still at home. Office mostly, some at home. So it's always at office, from home. So we're a mixture, about 50-50 at times. So we still have those that need to or will. So what I'd like to do then is talk about, if you have to use it out of sight, how we get into that if you haven't had a chance to download that already. And so, as you see me behindhand, I didn't say share my screen. How do we get into Iris and download all that good stuff to your home computer or a second computer? Hopefully you're seeing this. So to download, to get your Iris client on your home computer, you'll just need to go to a website such as this, which is the actual address. And don't worry if you suddenly get concerned that I'm not being able to see that one. Where did I go? How do I do that? That link, or if you put it in your browser, will take you to the Iris client. You just literally install it on the computer that you're working with. You do need to have Windows on the computer, so if you have a Mac, call us ahead of time and we'll talk about what we can do on that. So, but it does need to have the Windows as that. The other way that we can do that, if I can pull up a Chrome browser, and actually we will share the screen. On that, and just a browser, you go to the OregonCounties.org, the main AOC website. Under roads, there on the far right, goes down to the county road program and Iris. Once you bring that up, once the computer comes up, at the very bottom it has download the Iris client here. This will just gives people an idea of what those are, gives a view of what reports are already in the system. But if you needed to download it, it takes you to that link as well. So don't worry if you miss that link. If you're looking for where that is and that, you can always get there. So just to talk a little bit about security on that as you go home, or if you're off-site trying to get some of that, you want to make sure that you at least have a little virus protection on it, and as well as hopefully your printers will show up, but if not, you can always download those as well or get it from the regular login. Actually, why don't I just show that too? Let's see if we can get that to come up. And boom. There we go. So on the regular login, doing that, you have this button down there that says download printer client. So if your printer was not showing up, you can download it, a client. Hopefully that will take care of it. I know we still had some issues with some clients or some older computers, so that'll at least get you going. So you can then, once you've downloaded the Iris client, if the printers don't show up, you can download the printer client, and then you could be using that out of the office. Any questions on any of that so far on downloading or using it anywhere else? Okay, anything in the chat? No questions? That's okay. So again, we're about 50-50 on back in the office, which is good. I hope we all can get back there. But we also have it so we can still do offsite as needed. And with that too, I want to make sure that everyone knows that we're still here. We're still working and doing things. And so I want you to know that you can always still call us. You can always still get a hold of me. We have a toll-free number as well as the direct line to me, emails, and what's good is I harass all the programmers on things that stump me, which is unfortunately quite a few. There's little quirks and complexities, so they're always good about helping out. So don't be afraid to call or email and ask your questions and things that you need to know. I think, let me see if there's any questions. Said, we do have a question, said if you are working from home, will the printer download work from a home printer or the work printer? Why don't you go jump in, Casper, and say on that one a little bit more about the printers and any other security issues you want to talk about.
So when you're using the printers and you're configuring it for your home office, it'll use whatever printers are installed on your local machine. So it'll be whatever you have at your desk or in that local network. If you are trying to print back to your office, you might be able to do so with remote drivers or attaching through something like Chrome's browser extension for printers. But by default, it will be whatever printers you have locally installed on the machine. And from a security standpoint, you should probably be making sure that whoever has access to your machine, if you're going to save your credentials into the IRIS system, you keep in mind whatever linkage you have back to your main office, because whoever sits down there will gain access to your entire IRIS installation, and that could be a problem. So when working from home, keep in mind how you're intending to get your materials back and forth, but also who has access to your machine from a security standpoint.
Good point. Any other questions on that before we go forward? Anything we've talked about so far? Okay, not seeing any. Well, since we have Casper on, let me turn it over to him. I know we've been doing a lot of back of house things on IRIS, and we have. And to get it to hopefully run 9 better, as well as we migrate to 10 and do things there. And we've been doing a few other projects and modules. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Casper, let him explain what's been going on, what he's been having his developers do, and we can answer and get questions. So as he's have some questions on things he's talking about, give me a chat and I'll butt in to his conversation if we need to answer that right there. If not, we'll get a roundtable again and make sure we can answer those. Thank you, Casper.
All right. So as Greg alluded to, we get asked often what development has been taking place on IRIS behind the scenes and for the last year. So the primary prerequisites that we were attempting to accomplish in the last year have been rectifying some data structure changes that we needed to make, making sure that we had compatibility between 9 and 10 so that we could be seamlessly testing 10 data and 9 data side by side to ensure there were no issues, as well as rolling out changes to our virtualization infrastructure that actually hosts the servers and allows us to have external connectivity for things like the newly developed API system. So just as a basic visual aid, I'll bring this up. So if you've been participating in some of the conversation in the past, you've heard us reference the Nutanix cluster and the new servers quite a few times. This very simple little diagram here basically gives you an idea of what we're talking about, in that the Nutanix cluster is essentially a combination of server hardware that is running virtualized servers for all of our applications. So the biggest push last year was to get that new hardware deployed, because we needed to consolidate Iris 9 and 10 onto the same infrastructure so that we could have some seamless connectivity, so that we could do both testing, and now that we're rolling out beta access to certain applications, that users would be able to go back and forth without having to have some sort of handoff in data, as well as having our database administrator not losing his mind attempting to rectify any issues that he may find between the two sets of structure changes. Now, the biggest differences in Iris 9 and 10 are going to be the fact that Iris 10 is entirely web-based. So there is no locally installed client, and there is no need for the remote desktop connection anymore. If you've been around since very early on, you probably remember the phased rollout of 8 and 9, where module by module things became available, and we didn't move anyone until everything was completely ready for their particular use case. And that's going to be the same structure for 10. So even though you may not already be using front-end Iris 10 tools, we are already rolling out all of the back-end features, and you are actually already running on a lot of the systems. You just may not know it yet. And those counties who are being pulled into the beta program will be seeing the differences as they begin using and testing the new front-end applications. So let's go ahead and just pop in here and take a quick look at what one of these applications looks like, and we'll start with the report system. So now the IRIS report system is one of the simplest and the most complicated parts of IRIS. It has a lot of very complex reports, and in general, it is probably one of the most time-consuming for maintenance, simply because of the amount of manual changes and creations that need to occur for any particular data output, because it needs to be printer friendly. Now, one of the first things you'll notice when we come over to the new front end for the Iris 10 service is that there's a login screen, but we're going to have a new user system. So previously, users were defined simply by a username and password, and there were two sets of management occurring. You would have to reach out to Greg to have a user created, as well as your local administrator to have them create your user. In Iris 10, there's only one set of users, and your administrator controls them all. But the individual user may manage themselves should they do something like forget a password. They can do their own resets, their own reconfigurations, and then we can enforce complexity requirements on them as they go. Now, the other big change will be, instead of a username, we are going to be moving everyone to use their emails. The emails are just as unique, but this gives us the ability to ensure that they have a way to reset their password, as well as some way to contact them should we need to reach out to someone specifically. When you get included into the beta program will require that an administrator for your county be identified, who will be responsible for configuring the rest of the system and the rest of the users for the system. They will have to go through and ensure that everyone has emails. Greg will walk you through a little tutorial process on getting everything configured. And once you're into the beta program, you will see interfaces that are entirely web-based, as in this particular URL here. So in this example, using reports, reports.aociris.org is the unique identifier for the reports interface for 10. Every single module, just as in 8 or 9, will have a separation, but there will also be a unified main menu you can access everything from. So depending on your particular use case for the program, most people tend to use the My Iris limitation of the main menu to scope down how many options they have and eliminate a lot of what they don't use. The web-based version will allow you to do the same thing. We're going to allow you to build favorites, but also because this is a web application, you are able to simply use the favoriting system within the browser. So whether that's the brand new version of Internet Explorer that's based on Chromium, or if that's Google Chrome itself or Firefox, you'll be able to have your own repository of quick links or your own basic setup for management as well for reporting. Now, in this case, I chose reports just because it is one of the ones that has the most FTE time into it, recreating all of these reports. Ray has been basically dedicated to this task for the last several weeks, just polishing them up for the betas. Currently, we have very limited access to the beta for reports, but should you be interested, or if you run into a technical limitation that prevents you from doing something you need to for a business purpose, we will attempt to get you into the beta sooner rather than later so that you can overcome whatever limitation you've run into in 9. Now, if we come into the interface here for reports, it's pretty similar to IRIS 9, except for the layout is moved around a little bit. You have a basic method for choosing what report you're working on. You have now a description of the report that's more front and center. And as time progresses and as Greg does more trainings on these reports, or we get more technical questions about particular reports, we will come in here and add more notes to each report to help flesh out sort of a self-help section to allow you to answer your own questions before you go and have to test run reports. We've also added thumbnails for reports so that you can see a preview of what they should look like if you don't have data to be able to run it to see it fully fleshed out, or to see if that is something that you're actually looking for if you're not entirely sure which report format you're searching for. Down at the bottom here, we have the same basic filter structure that we had in 9, where you build your own where clause as you go for the reports. It functions very similarly to 9. We have unified the required and non-required filters so that these two grids are now in one. And if there are required filters in here, basically what will happen is it will be pre-populated with lines for you to fill out, and it will give you a prompt if you attempt to run it ahead of time without the proper required fields being filled in, to remind you to fill them in before you run the report, because the data may not be intact or it may not be able to successfully run at all. Now, I have some basic test data attached here, so I should be able to complete a report. So now here's a basic activity cost summary report. A lot of you are probably quite familiar with this if you are tracking by activity specifically. The reporting system is built so that all of this rendering and all of the printing is happening through your browser. So any printing problems that you currently have with IRIS 9 won't be in play in IRIS 10, as everything will be happening local to your machine. There will be no handoff to our servers. So these are rendered and then passed back to your local machine, and we are working on support for larger reports. We've had requests in the past for significantly larger reports than could feasibly be printed, but users had good use cases for why they wanted to collect the data and to have the ability to move it around in a localized file. So what we will be doing is separating out this rendering interface so that you have the printable capacity as well as a download capacity. And if the report is larger than a set metric, we will email the report to you once it's completed so that you don't have to sit around and wait for the report to finish rendering or querying. Now, the basic web interface doesn't really show itself as much on reports, but if we pop over to the other system currently in beta in permits, you'll get an idea of exactly how this system plays out when dealing with grids. All of these interfaces right now have me logging into them because we have them in the test environment. As we roll out the integrations with the API, that will become seamless. Once you sign into one particular portal or one particular part of the application, you will already be logged into all of IRIS, and you'll be able to simply move around without logging back in again. That same API, which will be facilitating your movement throughout IRIS, will also be what is allowing external connectivity for items such as GIS data pulls, data pulled to cost accounting systems, or even some insertions of data from the remote applications like the former IRIS Remote, which will be being replaced in IRIS 10. Now, I'm trying not to go into too much detail on the data transfer parts. The next 2 sessions that we have are more or less focused on the API and the data components of it. I did see in the chat that there were several people interested, particularly in GIS. And that has been something that Ken's been working extensively on recently, in cleaning up the data that's currently in the program and helping to identify how exactly it's being used right now. There are several counties currently using the nightly backups of the data from IRIS-9 for their GIS data, as well as pulling into other intermediary softwares for cost accounting and the like. But we don't have a very good catalog on how exactly those systems are being used and where. So we're attempting to refine that, get a better picture of how the current use cases are flowing through the system, and then establishing a simplified system with the API. Now, in this particular case with permits, we asked Polk if we could use them as an example because they're currently using the system and testing it out. They use quite a lot of the permitting system, and this is a good example of both how grids work within the system, the basic search functionality, as well as your basic interactions of edit, adding new items, deleting records, viewing existing items, or specialized menu options particular to that module. But also, this gives me a chance to show the comments and documents features, which have already been migrated from our IRIS-9. Currently, the way the system is working for testing, every night, whatever data has been put into IRIS-9 is being migrated into IRIS-10 so that our scripts can retest the data and validate that nothing is occurring in IRIS-9 that is not compatible with IRIS-10. In doing so, we also have already set up the capacity to migrate all of your existing documents as well as preserve documents entered in from IRIS-10. So in this example, if I'm looking at one of these permits, I can view the permit document by running what would be essentially the pop-up report. This allows them to print the permits that they're sending back out to the customer, and they can also take a copy of this if there's any concern for record keeping and attach it as a document with signature. In this particular case, that's exactly what they're doing. They have both the dynamically generated one for if they need to do a reprint or make a change, as well as having this static copy that was what was specifically signed and approved and sent out to the customer. If you have other items where you have multiple back and forths with a customer, those would also be shown here. Now, if I can move all my GoToMeeting stuff out of the way so I can actually manipulate my windows, we can pop over and look at the ODOT permit. Now, for those of you who currently use permits in IRIS-9, you probably noticed that this looks quite a bit different. We've consolidated all of the permitting options into the module as tabs. So your standard permits, your utility permits, and ODOT permits all exist within this one particular portal now. And everything works in the exact same way. So if you need to view a permit, print a permit, or make changes, you just come to this one single page. Now, this is a good chance to just look at the way that the comments are working rather. And basically, it's a running list of all the comments that have been put into the system, as well as the ability to see in detailed view long form comments. So one of the things grids don't do very well is output very long form documentation. People who put in particularly detailed notes, or there may be a back and forth interaction between multiple users putting in comments after comment or comment on top of comment. This gives you a better way to read the long form information without having to stretch your grid or change your grid config drastically just to attempt to see it, or having to run a static printable report. Now, being completely web-based as well, this system is something that will take a little bit of training and getting used to, which is why the acceptance into the beta program is very much dependent on Greg's availability for training and each individual county's uses of IRIS. What we're targeting first are systems like reports, permits, service requests, things that have little or no integration with the rest of the system, or at least requirements for data manipulation in the rest of the system. So ideally, as we walk through these systems that are more on the periphery of the main IRIS system, which we view as road inventory or cost accounting and AP, this gives us a much easier way to introduce counties to the new interfaces and the new changes to user management without having to make a radical shift in your day-to-day operations. If you are currently putting data into IRIS9, it's viewable and you can interact with it here in IRIS10 in the beta. But if you make the transition, for instance, to using IRIS10 primarily, if your permitting department were to move over to using the 10 interface only, we would have to know in advance to ensure that we basically set a cutoff point for when we would no longer sync data over the top of what's in 10. So the initial introduction to 10 is essentially a you can view and play with it phase, give us feedback on any sort of interaction errors or any sort of changes you might recommend. The secondary phase to that is there's a confidence level that they will now be using it primarily. And what we need to do is ensure users are no longer putting data into the 9 system so that we can ensure everything comes from one direction in 10. Now, that is one of the biggest limitations for who is allowed to come into the beta program right there, because a lot of counties are heavily engaged in multiple parts of IRIS and are not going to be able to separate the users who are doing permits from the users who are doing cost accounting easily. If you are one of those cases, or if you're someone who has such a vested interest in seeing the new interface that it's worth the juggling of the 2 systems to you, you can choose to get in here to the early group, and Greg can see when we can work you in for training and looking at getting you set up to use the system. Now, the 2 other systems that are coming up into beta most immediately are SRS and the IRIS10 remote. Very few counties actually use the remote system as it currently stands. It is the localized installed version that is on laptops for collecting data disconnected from the main system in the field. That system is being completely overhauled to better support GIS functionality and be integrated directly with some of the Esri tools for mapping on the device. So we're currently in the prototyping phase to ensure how that will actually work and what platforms can be supported for that. The service request system is currently in final testing and will be opening to beta for counties who are heavy power users or who want to do initial pre-screenings of the system to give us their feedback and make requests, probably in the next month or so. When we open this up and phase it in, we're going to try to work with counties that are already currently in the beta for one of the other modules first, just to reduce the training load. And then we'll be adding in additional counties based on your particular need or based on a error or something that might be preventing workflow, as I mentioned before.
But don't be afraid, I can go anywhere.
Exactly. So the goal here is just simply not to overextend Greg and not to force you to make any changes that will impact your users or your workflow in a way that is detrimental. Now, I would like to go into this in more detail, but we really need to kind of stay high level for this one. So the next couple sessions, the next webinar in particular is dealing with getting data in and out of the system and discussing some of the particular use cases counties already use for getting data into their GIS applications or pulling them out to some middleware to pull into cost accounting systems. And then the third session will be particularly focused on GIS. We will be doing some demonstrations of the mapping capacity, discussing the more detailed cleanup functionality that Ken's been adding into the back end to help rectify issues with data that's already in IRIS9 for GIS, cleaning up some of the projections and making them more readily available to external applications. And we'll also be touching on some of the powers of the API for more live interactions with your data rather than waiting for snapshot data that may be stale. So I believe that is about all I can cover for right now. If you guys have any questions about what I ran through very, very briefly, go ahead and throw them out and Greg can help facilitate fielding them.
Yeah, I've unmuted everybody, so if you've got something or if you put it in chat, we can go from there. Just that more information. But as you're talking, Casper, or as we're looking to see if there's any other questions, I saw a whole bunch of reports on the report page. And what if I only use, say, 4 or 5 all the time? Do I need to search for them always?
So the report system currently in 9 is broke out by module. In 10, what we've done is we've given you the ability to favorite your reports. So for instance, this cost summary report, if I favorite it, it will always be locked to the top of my list. If I have a less frequently used report that I don't want favorited, but I want to be able to find, the search box now searches your entire list. So if I'm searching for a specific report number, for instance, I find a report that says CIS 1004 in the corner, I have the ability to go search on these particular report numbers or any particular language that's in the report. So if there's a description of a report, you'll have the ability to search also for the language in that description. It'll help narrow down some reports that overlap between APS and cost accounting that were really frustrating to find in IRIS 9.
Great, thank you very much. And people are commenting that it looks like the crossover or going to 10 is not going to be a major, my world is going to crash. So, and that's really what we're hoping. We want to make it, and then we keep tweaking and making it better and go from there. But
the goal is to not force anyone to have to make the transition until they're ready to, both from an availability standpoint for training and also a comfortability with the new interface. There won't be any abrasive transition unless we just completely run out of time to transfer systems. So this should be a pretty ongoing process, and we'll be opening it up more and more as the year progresses, as also everybody's back in the office. But hopefully, as we start to find some better test cases for these new modules, and we get a little bit better comfortability with what we're releasing to ensure it meets what you need.
There was another question, Casper, is talking about, will there be a crew workload management or work assignment capabilities like we currently have?
Yes, there will be crew systems. There will also be the individualized time cards for semi-individualized management. Part of what will dictate how those systems shape up will be what the need is. Right now, the use of the crew system is a little scattered in how certain counties deploy it, and the use of individualized time cards or crew enter time cards is a little sporadic. So what we're going to attempt to do is get some more information on everybody's individual use cases and try to come up with a little bit more standardized format for its application. We want to try to reduce the amount of overhead involved in turnover. One of the goals with this system is to simplify it so that turnover isn't quite as painful as losing your current IRIS guru.
And there was another one, and this may be one we have to take offline, but we had a user saying, will there be a mobile variation of the app that functions where there's no signal, then syncs when you get back to the signal range?
Currently, there's already that version of IRIS. That's what the IRIS remote is. Only a handful of counties actually use that system. The current version is rather configuration intensive, so most counties have opted not to use it. It requires localized hardware having SQL Server installed and doing pretty extensive synchronizations before you enter the field to actually enter data. The next generation is currently in the works. Ken is actually completing his initial reviews of the platform for it right now and working on ensuring that we'll have something that should work better with our Esri tools for the collection of GIS data, as well as the manipulation and correction of GIS data in that platform. Primarily, that application for offline use is focused around collecting things like inspection data, or to do things like attach images to signs and things like that. So that'll be our focus when that comes out here in the near future, and when we begin a very narrow set beta on that, because it does require localized installations. We'll need a lot more hands-on training as well as troubleshooting and support, because there's a very wide variety of hardware available. We will also be looking at potentially down the road doing an actual full mobile version that is compatible with lightweight OSs, mobile OSs like Android or iOS, which will be dependent on essentially the supported load we're looking at, how widely adopted it might be, and what the primary use cases of that system would be. It's entirely possible that what may end up happening is a merger of the two later on, but because we have a currently existing system in the IRIS remote, we're going to emulate that first so that the users currently using it don't get left high and dry when we transition to 10.
Okay. Are there any other questions or concerns that I can have Casper answer? Okay, well then I want to try to best I can is keep us to a schedule. I just stole it all from Casper. Next, talk about our upcoming webinars. And again, we are planning to continue this about every 3 weeks. And actually with this too, I'm going to send out a survey to everybody shortly after this. So probably with any luck be out Friday, and you can look over what we've got on the trainings. Is there something, and maybe what's your top 3? Do you want to move up to the top? What are we doing? And then give you a little bit more information again, like on the second webinar, retrieving data from IRIS9 for third-party applications and what the API is. And give us a 10,000 foot level of that, Casper. What is that really entailing? What's going on with that? Whoop, he bounced up. Oh, there he is.
Sorry, got cut off. What was that? Can you repeat the last little bit?
Just what is this on the second webinar coming up on June 18th? We want to look at retrieving data and third-party applications and the API. What is that really at a 10,000 foot level?
So in essence, that will be focused entirely on third-party data integrations into IRIS or using your current IRIS data in other applications that you may build. So currently, IRIS9 has the option that many counties are using in which they collect their data in nightly snapshots. We will be addressing how currently it's being used for third-party applications. And then we will also be focused on the IRIS10 API, which will give you direct interactions with the live data should you have a use case that needs more frequent data pulls than what you're getting nightly.
Okay. But again, we're going to do a variety of webinars on topics. So that survey you're sending out does a couple of things. It will be, are we hitting the topics that you need? Do we miss something? So look for that survey. And this was in the original send out about this webinar, but I will copy it and send it as well on that survey as a separate document, so you can always have that and see where we are looking at. So that's what's coming down the pike for us. Were there any additional questions that we can answer? Because that's the main thing we had for today. And
there's a question in there about user-defined columns. In IRIS10, we are intending to preserve user-defined columns, customized columns. There has been some issue in the past with some of the extensibility around them, so there might be some limitation on what they're allowed to do in the future to prevent people from breaking the data exports and messing with third-party applications that may be sharing the data, for instance, binding to lists and things like that. But the idea is to preserve as much of the functionality of IRIS9 as possible in the new version as well.
Great. Just typing up an answer for everybody. Any other questions in the chat? I know that Douglas County had said they're very interested in the IRIS remote, so we will make sure we keep them on our hit list and on the horizon for that as you start rolling that out. As I said, with these webinars, we want to try to keep to an hour or less. If there's additional questions and it's going long, then people can drop off and we can answer those questions. But for the most part, everything going forward, that's what we're going to try to do. On that survey coming forward, give us better days if you don't like the days. And this Thursday is what we looked at from some calendars. But otherwise, if you like that, that's great. If you like this time, or give us some times and we can try to get the most people in. Like this was great having 40 people come in on this one. One last chance. Is there any questions that people have that we can ask for them and go from there? Okay, well, I think we're good. I appreciate very much that you guys all took the time to come to this. Again, any questions, please don't hesitate to call us, to email us, whatever you need. and we are there to help you out. And like I said, when I can't get it right off the bat, we'll get the programmers and everybody in, and they can look at it from a different direction. So appreciate you attending, and hopefully we'll see you in 3 weeks at the next the next IRIS conference here and webinar and conference. Thank you very much.